Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Matthew from the Impact Innovation Group, and we're working with Queensland's government to deliver a series of webinars for Queensland Small Business Week. Today's webinar topic is business models and testing your ideas with our guest presenter, Maree Franettovich from CQ University. Just while we are waiting for the other people to connect into the webinar, I'll go through some of the tools we'll be using. For those people who haven't reviewed or viewed a webinar with the Citric GoToWebinar systems before. Lovely. Your screen should look like this. A slide in the center and a control panel on your dashboard to the right. This control panel will collapse automatically when you're not using it. So to keep it open, just click the View menu up the top and uncheck the Auto Hide control panel. During the webinar, we might ask you a question so we can better understand your experience with the topic. We'll ask you to raise your hand, and to do that, just click the little hand icon on the side control panel. Remember to lower your hand afterwards just by clicking the icon again. There's also an opportunity for you to ask questions so the webinar can flow smoothly and we stick to the time allocated. We prefer to answer these questions at the end, but you can send us your questions throughout the webinar and we'll collate them. We won't be doing a poll today, so please ignore that. Unfortunately, the handouts weren't ready, but if you're able to email me at info@impactinnovationgroup.com, I'd be more than happy to send them out to you. Maree has very kindly offered and presented these slides to us, so we're more than happy to distribute that if you email me through. Apologies for that. So now it's time to bring on our presenter for today, Maree. Maree is a lecturer in business with CQ University Mackay School of Business and Law. Maree is a strong advocate of lifelong learning and passionate about encouraging students from the region to invest in their career success and to take advantage of opportunity. This links with Maree's long-standing professional interest in regional capacity building and focus on small business success. Maree has worked in big and small business throughout her career and has applied professional and expertise in management, human resources, marketing, and corporate communications across a diverse range of Australian industries, including federal parliament, tourism, higher education, the financial sector, health service, agribusiness, transport, logistics, civil construction. Maree has also worked tirelessly overseas in her fields of expertise. So I'll transfer it over to Maree and we shall listen to her. So Maree, welcome to the webinar.
Good afternoon and thank you very much, John, and thank you to all the participants for joining us today. So today we're going to talk about business models and testing your ideas in celebration of Small Business Week, and it's great to have a celebration of small business. So one of the most important things to realise when we're in small business is basically, if you've got a great business idea, how do you actually plan to make money for it? So I was just wanting to get an idea of how many of you, if you use the hand raiser, how many of you are actually not yet in small business or thinking about going into small business? All right, so it's good to see that there's some interest there. And what about those who are already in business and maybe looking to do some different things? Well, that's great. So it looks like we've got a bit of a mix here today. So I'll be looking forward to those questions at the end of our session. So obviously we go into business to make money. There might be a lot of other benefits we receive from it as well, but essentially making money is the essence of business. So let's move on to talking about a business model. So the business model describes the rationale of how an organisation creates, delivers and captures value. So what we're looking at is everything that we do in the business. So when we want to know how to get going with a business model and start to explore how we intend to operate and make money, these are the types of things that we need to think about. And it's a great way to start breaking it down, because sometimes when you're starting to go into business, or when you're moving to grow your business, it can become a bit overwhelming. So you've got this great idea, then how the hell do you decide how you're going to make that money? So start to think about who is your target customer. What problem or challenge are you solving for the customer? So not what you're going to sell the customer, what's the problem or challenge that you're solving? What value do you deliver? How will you actually reach those customers? How will you define and differentiate your offering from those that are already out there? A big one, how will you generate revenue? What are your costs? And then from that, we'll be able to work out what's the profit margin. So this is just looking at a business model in a visual way. So what's your product or service? How are you going to deliver that to your customers? How are you going to generate the revenue and capture that value in the organisation? So really it's just another way of looking at it. So when we develop a business model, this is looking at it at a very strategic way in the business rather than an operational assessment. And it focuses on how we're going to capture value. So start to think, what is your very specific value proposition that you're bringing to the marketplace? And regardless of whether you've got a small business or a big business, the same principles apply. So as we talk about some of the examples I've got for you today, they're more well-known entities, so that it was easy to actually get a grasp on looking at how we create the value proposition. So business models can be used whether you're starting a new business, whether you want to grow your business, or whether you're at a point but you want to make some sort of transformation in your business. So it's a really great way of looking at your business from all of these different perspectives. And there's lots of different business model examples, and I'm going to highlight a couple of these to you today, but look, there's lists and lists, so really it's just about understanding where your value comes from, but we'll go through a couple today. So you can see there's an add-on model, affiliate, auction, bait and hook might apply to fisher people. The franchise model, many of you would be familiar with, perhaps those who buy their various fast food. The freemium model, low cost, pay-as-you-go, recurring revenue, and a couple of interesting ones you might not have thought about. Even though it's illegal activity, the Somali pirates do actually have a business model. They work on the fact that if they actually get so much stash from so many boats that they hijack, that they've actually got a revenue stream. Probably not one recommended. The consequences are a bit dire. And there is the scam business model. And actually there was a report on the news this morning about just this inordinate amount of dollars that small business in particular loses to the various types of scams. So for those people operating the scams, they know what their value proposition is. They know how they're going to generate their revenue. So a business model applies to legal and illegal activity. As I said, I wouldn't recommend either of those last two. And again, whether you're big or small, the same principles apply. So let's have a look at a low-cost model. So budget airlines are actually a low-cost business model, and it's been pioneered with the Irish airline Ryanair, and Tiger Air is also one of those. And it's now becoming quite popular in the hotel industry. So this is basically where everything is cost minimised or cost reduced, and entire business models are being reassessed on that. So the focus is on streamlining and driving out any costs that are incurred by the business and therefore don't necessarily generate revenue. So let's have a look at how that works. The low-cost business model is extremely well established. The aim is to drive significant volumes of customers, so you need to be able to do that. it's low cost to actually get your customers on board, and you're able to charge a very low price. And then you generate some revenue there, but also you're generating revenue then from all these extras that are purchased because you've already got the customer on board. So if you actually think about it from some of the low-cost airline models, they actually charge you to buy your good once you're becoming a customer. Sometimes they use advertising, so they generate revenue through advertising on seats that may be in the aircraft. There might also be lottery ticket sales in association with that. You have to pay in addition for flight insurance. So in other words, you're actually paying for everything in addition, and all of those things become revenue generating for that particular business model. So they may sell train tickets in association with that, and there'll be some revenue generation on that. So that starts to look at partnering as part of the low-cost model, priority seating. And as you know, if you want to do anything other than what the low-cost option provides, you have to pay significant charges for that. And also, they'll work with their hire car partners and maybe even hotels, and you will get a preferred hire car or hotel rate. So there'll be a revenue charge to those hotels and those hire companies for actually letting them piggyback with you. And obviously the low-cost airline proved quite a disruptor in that business. So one of the important things while you're looking at your own business model is to actually understand what's happening out there in the marketplace and the different ways of actually generating that revenue. So one of the possible options at looking at how you're going to really look at where you do generate the revenue in your business and how you actually are going to make money is it's called the business model canvas. And as I said, it's just one of a number of tools that you could possibly use. So by looking at this, these are the questions, if you're using this business model, that you need to answer. So which customers and users are you serving, and which jobs do they really want to get done? So from a value proposition, what are you actually offering them? What is that getting done for them, and do they really care? So what is it that you can bring to be able to do for those customers? It's important to those customers, and so that's your offering to them. So when you look at channels, how does each customer segment want to be reached? So how are you going to make those contacts, and what are the interaction points with your customer? So in terms of customer relationships, what relationships are you establishing in terms of, is it personal, automated, retentive? What are customers going to be willing to pay for in terms of generating your revenue stream? And how are you going to generate that particular transaction or generate a recurring revenue stream? What resources do you need in your business model that actually are key? So what are the things you absolutely have to have, otherwise you're not going to be able to bring that value proposition to the actual customer? Also, what activities do you need to perform? What's crucial? What partners do you need? What suppliers do you need to leverage? And what sort of cost structure are you dealing with? So anyway, this will be a recurring theme as we progress. So that's just the 9 key questions of the business model canvas. And if you can pull apart your great business idea and answer those questions, then you're well on the way. And what this does is it drills down to actually identify for you where your revenue is going to come from, what you absolutely have to have in place, what costs you've got, and therefore what profit you're going to make. So I just want to go to this particular one here. So this is the tool that you can actually use around those questions that I have just posed. So again, just to quickly recap, number 1 is about what are your customer segments. So what is it that you're going to do for customers? How are you going to serve your customers, and what do they look like? Number 2, what are you offering them, and what is it that you are going to do for them, and do they really care? So obviously, the more that you can serve them with something they care about, the greater opportunity you have to attract those customers. 3, we look at channels. So how does each customer segment want to be reached? What are the interaction points? So if you think about the low-cost airline model, which we'll have a look at again for one of these completed, is that a lot of that has moved to an online platform. So technology has actually enabled that particular business model to thrive. What relationships are you going to establish with your customer? So what are your customers going to be willing to pay for? So obviously all of your customers are going to be prepared to pay for the ticket, and you offer then that they can pay via credit card or probably some direct debit or BPay, but you're actually charging them for providing that service. Then also you need to look at the revenue streams. So in doing that, how are you going to generate that recurring value? Or is it a significant big transaction and maybe they don't come back? With the resources, what do you absolutely need to have? Obviously, if you're running a low-cost airline, you still need to have the plane, but there's some things you can do around driving the costs down by having those, even with purchasing planes, which are a significant capital item. What things do you need to do really well in your business model? What things are crucial, and that's the key activities. And with the key partnerships, which partners and suppliers leverage your model? So in the partnerships for the airline, think about that, all those co-deals, you know, the insurance. So the hotels, the hire cars, they're part of the partners. And what's your actual cost structure in the business? And what are the key elements that drive your costs? So here's one prepared earlier, the low-cost model for an airline. So in answering those questions, so number 1 was who's your customer segment? So what you're looking at are budget travellers. So you can clearly identify those people. And when we look back to when the budget airline model really came into Australia, they were actually looking at people who had who did not anticipate travelling by plane or who had never travelled by plane before. So there was an untapped market out there, and one of the ways to provide that particular value to budget travellers was to provide cheap flights. So they wanted to get from A to B, but they didn't really care about all the frills that went with the current airline model that existed prior to that. It's not to say there's not a place in the market for it, but what was happening here is that a different value proposition was being created. And I'm sure many of us can, you know, relate to this particular model. So the revenue stream is created essentially through the tickets. So you know you're going to get that from your budget travellers. And then because they are actually purchasing the ticket, there's some additional fees that coexist alongside the purchase of the ticket. So you actually generate revenue from your fees. So when you look at the channels, most of this now has actually gone to online. So that's a key part of being able to provide this particular service and value. There are some limited opportunities in the call centre if you've got some very specific requirements, but essentially it's all driven online. So you can see how that really drives out costs as well. And if we have a look at the customer relationships, essentially it's automated and impersonal. And even though you're providing a customer service, it's not actually being provided by face-to-face, person-to-person. So there's systems in place to allow all this to occur that actually follows that very similar transaction between you and a person. And now, thanks to technology, the benefit of the assistance is also coming from those little chat services that pop up when you're on there if you need it. So the things that, the key resources that you need to underpin your business model for if you're one of these airlines. So essentially you buy a very similar type of aircraft across your fleet, and then you only need a certain type of expertise, and you actually benefit around having easier servicing requirements, having parts, all those types of things. So again, this is part of that streamlining. What you'll notice too with budget airlines is that they don't always fly into main airports. They actually fly into what are called secondary airports, and the fees for actually using those airports are significantly less. So again, this is about driving out costs. So you can see that a low-cost model is always about driving out costs. Yep, if we're going to fly from Sydney to Melbourne, yes, we obviously need to land in Melbourne, but where can we land that will actually be a much cheaper airport for us? And if you want to travel by budget, you appreciate that these are just part of it. So number 7, some of the key activities. One of the things that our low-cost airlines need to do is have very quick turnarounds, so that the way the fee structure is at airports, they actually meet these requirements. Hence, you'll notice now when you're going on flights that you've got to be there a significant time before, when a lot of these low models came in, and that had nothing to do with security in the initial time. What key partnerships do you need? All of those airlines, budget airlines, offer insurance, so you need to be able to offer that. And so you need a partner to do that, because that's not your core business. Hotels, you need to make deals with other hotel chains that are prepared to come on board with you, and the same with car rentals. And from a cost point of view, these are the areas that you have to be able to manage significantly. So you need to understand how your maintenance is going to happen, something you absolutely have to do. You need to look at the cost structures around your fees associated with airports. You need to ensure that your training is done appropriately. And here, there's some costs associated with call centres, but they're certainly minimised by the use of automated services, but you still need some placement in a call centre. So this is using a low-cost airline model to actually applying the business canvas model. So you can see you really pull apart and identify who your customers are, so you get a real handle on that, and then that helps flow through to the rest of the model. So if you'd like to use your hand raiser here, I was just wondering if anyone knows what this particular product is that's represented in this slide. All right, so it's a bit like the quiz on the radio in the mornings. This is Gillette, a world famous brand now, and certainly having your baby shave your face suggests that there's an element of safety around this. But Gillette's been through some ups and downs as well, so they had to think about how they would innovate in their business model from the days where razors were a different option to what they are now. So in business model innovation with Gillette, so what Gillette did was sold the razor at low cost, and then consumers would happily pay for the blades. So this is about getting your customer into your market, and then once they're in your market, they're going to continue buying the blades because that's what they get value out of. And essentially you get almost a lifetime of loyalty. So for people to switch, they'd have to go and get another razor. And then one of the things we know in observing customer behaviour is that we're reluctant to actually make a move unless we absolutely have to. So that loyalty is very important. So Gillette actually made a loss sometime on its razor, but what they gained was lifetime recurring revenue. So they provided something at below market price, but they actually created a market for a secondary product, the blade, and it's about ongoing revenue and profits. And because the markup is actually quite high on that secondary product, it's extremely profitable to Gillette. to have that recurring revenue through the blade. And if you think about it today, more and more we can purchase inexpensive printers, but certainly the ink cartridges that we need to buy to service the printers are quite significantly priced. So to get us into the market, the printer's an easy buy, if you like, but certainly with the replacement cartridges, that's where they're actually generating the revenue, but it's also highly profitable. And this is what the business model canvas actually looks like for Gillette razors and blades. So we're looking at mass customers, so you want a lot of customers, and the revenue stream is generated, as I've already said, through purchasing one handle, and obviously you need frequent blade replacements, and I'm sure I don't need to tell the gents out there about that, and even for the women. So the value proposition in this case as well actually comes from, the customer gets a razor and then they need to just buy replacement blades when they need them. So yes, it is important to the customer, and yes, they care. So that's answering that question there. In terms of the channels, so Gillette uses obviously retail channels for that, and that's fairly standard for that particular type of product, so they need to understand what that relationship is there. In terms of the customer relationships, it's like a built-in lock-in, so there's a strong loyalty in a customer relationship. So you don't talk to Gillette yourself, but there's a strong loyalty to that brand through the particular retailer, and you can go to whatever the supermarket retailer is, and there's probably some other retailers as well. So the key activities are around marketing, research and development to continue to have the best possible blade, and also in logistics, because obviously products have to get from wherever they're manufactured to the supermarkets. What are the key resources that you need? Well, Gillette is a significant brand, so you have to maintain that brand, but also on those particular products that they've invested heavily in the research and development, they want to take out patents on those so that there's something very special to the customer about actually having a Gillette razor. The key partnerships in this case are with the manufacturer. So Gillette would have someone manufacture those blades under license, the handle and the blades under license, and you need key relationships with the retailers to understand how your product is actually going to front to the customer. And the costs, so the things that you need to be keeping an eye on and managing is obviously your manufacturing, research and development, whatever you put into marketing, and certainly those logistics, because it's a key part of getting your product to your customer. Let's move on to George. So this is about a very famous brand again, but also looking how they've been able to take what has essentially been a brand around coffee, quite a long-standing brand, but how could they gain some additional value out of it? So this is why we're talking about business model transformation. So I'm just going to move actually to the business model canvas for Nespresso to talk you through the business model transformation. If need be, I will go back to this particular slide, and so let's have a look at that business model canvas. So the idea of the Nespresso, which belongs to the company of Nestle, is that essentially this was about bringing a coffee shop experience, personalising it into our homes and into our businesses. So they saw an opportunity to do this. And one of the ways that they decided to do this was to actually create, very similar to Gillette, they actually created their own machine. So not just any coffee machine that they would put their coffee through, they actually created their own machine, a very sleek looking machine, a very elegant looking machine. So the thing that you would have in your household looked just as good as that beautiful machine you see when you go into coffee shops. So it was about having all of that experience, but you're now able to have it in your household. But they also created a proprietary product to go with those machines. So it was the coffee pod, which is the cup of, which makes the key ingredient for the cup of coffee. So you had the Nespresso machine, and then you needed the Nespresso pods, and there's a range of those pods. So that's in the revenue stream. And what they did was, with these machines, understanding that once the customer had purchased the machine, then they would continue to have a revenue stream through the pods. So essentially the machine was not highly priced, and it's readily accessible to the customer and available, you know, through some of our electrical stores, and very readily accessible, even some, I believe, at Big W. So you've got this whole experience becoming very, very affordable. So the value proposition to the customer, it's about the whole pursuit of pleasure and luxury, and people care about that. We've got a significant cafe culture happening, so this is why it's important to look outside and understand what's happening in the broader market as a way that you can capture value for a customer. So the machines themselves are considered, you know, a key acquisition. They're very elegant, they look very nice sitting on your kitchen bench. And the pods, so customers can still have all the choice under the sun, and it can be individualized to them through the whole range of Nespresso pods. The customer relationships are maintained through the Nespresso Club. Some have exclusivity of events, and some limited editions that come out. Interestingly, Nespresso uses a range of channels to make contact with the customer, and this is because we're really looking at a very broad market. So in some of the larger metropolitan, actually Nespresso retail stores that sell those range of pods for you. You can buy them online, the pods online. You can buy them through some selected retail outlets. So there's a whole lot of different ways that you can have that particular experience. So for example, in Mackay, you can get them at some different retailers, or you could buy them online. We certainly don't have a Nespresso concept store. Might be a nice addition though to our economy. So the key resources for Nespresso are coffee, and obviously the patent on their machine. And their key activities is around business to consumer distribution. A very key activity is marketing. Many of you would have seen, excuse me, the George Clooney advertising. And obviously they need to produce the pods, and they have relationships with coffee machine manufacturers, so it would be manufactured under license. They also have relationships with their growers where they purchase their coffee, and I'll just come back to that in a moment as well. So in terms of their cost structure, they've got production costs, they've got distribution costs, and they do invest quite significantly into marketing to create that desire around people wanting to have that experience. So I'm just going to go back to the picture slide. So in this wonderful transformation, Nespresso actually did start to encounter some slight difficulties, and also taking account of the customer feedback, which they were able to receive quite readily because of the different ways that they make contact with the particular customers. And one of the areas was actually around, so people were using all these pods, but the pods in themselves were not readily able to be recycled. And you can appreciate that in our changing customer landscape, that a lot of these people purchasing these pods were quite concerned about the impact of their own coffee culture. So in part of transforming this and really tapping into some of that social responsibility, Nespresso actually has put together a complete recycling program which exists in Europe as well as in Australia. And now you can drink your cup of coffee knowing that you're not actually adding to an environmental problem, but a solution has been put in place. And so in Australia, they partner with Australia Post. In the European countries, they partner with the equivalent, and there's actually a whole recycling program. So essentially you get these bags, you put your pods in these bags, you pop them in Australia Post bins, and it will go back, and whatever needs to happen to them from a recycling point of view will happen. So a really clever way, but they've really tuned into their customer to understand how they're going to maintain that really positive relationship. In terms of accessing their coffee as well, they actually work very closely with their producers of coffee, and often these are in South American countries. So they have a goal of being 100% sustainably sourced coffee. Again, this appeals to their customer base. So by drinking that cup of coffee, you almost feel like you're having a very personal experience with the coffee grower in whether it's Colombia, Peru, wherever it is, and you are actually contributing to economic well-being in that country. So it's not an exploitation model at all. So appreciating that perhaps this will increase the cost slightly of the pod, but knowing the customer base and knowing that there's that relationship that you're not exploiting, that has been extremely successful for Nespresso. So they've moved from this very simple experience in terms of how you in your home or your business can have a coffee shop experience, but they've also tapped into some other aspects of their customer, which has enabled them to maintain loyalty. And you'll see there their key partners, the coffee machine manufacturers, the coffee growers, and the other thing we could add in there now would certainly be around logistics, and that has been with Australia Post here and similar postal services overseas. So that whole recycling aspect of the pod has become a key part of the value proposition to the customer. So Nespresso's success, to sum it up, it's a revenue logic similar to the razor blade. High quality coffee machines, elegant design. They've worked with licensing partners. They get the customer on board, so they're willing to not make a profit from the machines, but they generate revenue through the capsule sales. The profit margin on the actual capsules is reported to be around 85%, and they also cross-sell coffee accessories. So the one thing that Nespresso does well, it focuses on its core business. So further to their success is that they have a business model that's unique, difficult to imitate, and it's internally consistent. In other words, it fits with what they know and do well. The business model builds on sustainable positioning, meets these long-term trends. Remember I mentioned to you that convenience is a big thing currently for all of us. We've definitely got the big coffee culture thing happening. There's some quite unbelievable statistics on how much Australians are committed to their coffee and coffee culture. And the whole online capacity for distribution has, so our ordering and thus using partners for distribution has become a big part of why Nespresso was able to actually make those touch points with their customer. So various advances in the marketplace and trends have actually allowed Nespresso to transform. So their product, the coffee and the espresso machine, are perfectly aligned. So there's that wonderfully tight relationship, and it actually supports their positioning. As I've just mentioned, they were very clear on what their core business was and their non-core business. So they focused on their core, which was the coffee, and they outsourced other areas with partners for non-core. So the production of the machine has gone under a licensing agreement, of which they're still intimately involved, but it's not Nespresso themselves doing it. And they didn't start their own parcel distribution service. They went out to those who were already doing that business and partnered with them. So that becomes part of non-core. And they were really clear on what their value creation was and how they were going to capture that value for the customers. And by actually doing that, they were able to readily define what their profit formula was. So this goes back to the very beginning, where it's really important to be able to identify what your profit formula is going to be from actually solving a customer need. And you might say, well, there's a lot of coffee capsules out there now being sold, and of course there is. But what Nespresso has in its favour, and is still able to differentiate itself in the marketplace, is that it has been quite difficult to actually duplicate the entire system that they have going. So yep, you might be able to buy other coffee pods, and you might be able to use them in even generic machines, but essentially what Nespresso is saying, if you want this particular experience, then this is the way to have that experience. And they've been able to transform the model by tapping into trends and other developments in the marketplace. So they have a business model that's not easily duplicated, which has become the foundation for sustained success. And I still quite enjoy seeing George on that TV. So with the business model, by having to go through the process, and whether you use this very simple business model canvas or whether you use some other similar tools out there, by answering those questions and taking the time and effort to do that, which sometimes might be a little confronting, you actually will get to the very core of how you are going to make money from your great business idea, which is the essence of business. So you will be able to take this business model canvas, and with the accompanying slides, you'll be able to pull apart your particular business idea if you're new going into business. If you're currently in business and wondering where you're at, you're still able to actually use the business model canvas and those questions to explore and see where you're creating the value, where you're capturing the value, who are your customers, what are your revenue streams, and what's your cost structure. So for your success, this then leads into about you creating what's a unique value proposition and looking at a business model that somebody can't come along and easily duplicate, and that then provides you with your foundation for sustained success. That's not to say that you don't need to still continue monitoring what you're doing and what's happening and actually looking out there in the marketplace, but it just means that you give yourself that opportunity to be as successful as you can possibly be, because the idea itself is not what is going to generate necessarily the sustained success. It's actually how you put it all together. One of the things I will say, in whether I'm working in my role in the university or whether it's when I've worked with businesses, I really encourage people to take advantage of all the free advice and assistance that's out there, and you're going to be congratulated today for signing up to the webinars for Small Business Week. There are fabulous resources out there, and it is a credit to Small Business Queensland just what resources are available via their site. And I know they work closely with other entities that provide support to small business as well. So some absolutely fabulous opportunities out there to do some research without having to. You will need to invest your time. Make sure you're using very credible sites, of course, but it is a real credit that these resources are available to you at no charge. Back to you, John.
Thank you very much, Maree, for your insight on into business model innovation and examples of some really interesting examples, actually, of opportunities that we can all take advantage of in moving forward. We do have a few more questions, and I encourage all of our attendees, if you do have questions for me, to please post them up into the questions tab. There's an initial question, kind of a simple question, I suppose, from Gary to start us off. What's the difference between margin and markup?
Well, you will, how can I best explain this? So if you think about a margin in terms of your overall business, you know, what sort of margin do you need to work on to make sense for you? But I'd still get you to go back and explore that. What you might have is on different types of products, for example, or solutions that you offer the customer, you would have a different markup on that. So if I could use the example of white goods, and look, I'm just using a figure here, there's actually not a lot of markup on white goods. You'll notice that across all of the different retailers, they're pretty much in the same range. So there might be a very small markup on that. So that's a percentage of what, if you buy it for $100 and you mark it up, you know, it's then $110. So that's what I would consider the markup. But in terms of your overall business, so these places don't only sell white goods, they also sell, so let's say a Harvey Norman sells small appliances, and some of them are hair appliances, some of them are kitchen appliances. Well, each of those would have a different markup. But overall, you have to look at what's a successful operating margin for your business. You can sometimes find industry benchmarks around margins, so that if you're in a particular industry, you'd want to be looking at this particular margin. I hope that helps, Gary.
Thank you so much for that, Maree. The next question is from Makara. Do you have an example of the low-cost business model being applied to a small business? The reason why is because they've trying to apply the understanding of an the airline or the large Gillette company, whereas small business is a bit more limited in their capabilities.
Certainly, and one of the things that I've thought about around that would be perhaps a cafe or a small there where a key part of the food you get at a certain price or at a certain value, but then if you want all, you get to choose whichever extras you want to purchase, so that say you get, you know, you're looking for a little lunch plate, and the lunch plate is you can choose your beef, and you can choose your main, as in beef or fish or whatever, and you get a potato or something like that. But if you want, you know, carrots, broccoli, salad, etc., all of those additions come at a particular fee or price. So sandwich bars might often do that. You could do it around, you know, a small servicer for vehicles even. So essentially the principle is, regardless of whether it's an airline or not, is what is the thing that the customer absolutely wants to have as a core, and then you're saying we're going to give you the options. So if you want those other things, someone who really cares about having those other things will pay. Someone who didn't want them then is not paying for something they don't want. So that actually adds to the value proposition there.
Excellent. Just one of our questions have come in via email. Excuse me. Just in regards to the business model concept, how do I implement my business model without impacting my current revenue stream?
If you're working on a current premise and then you're looking to make a shift on that, you do need to look at, you know, a transition time for that. And some businesses might do that very promptly. They might use end of financial year or a particular time to do that. And it might be that you do some things in parallel for a little while, not knowing exactly what your business is, or you might bring in an aspect, a different aspect of creating value for the customer. You just have to be careful not to mix up your messages. You know, so if you're going from a premium service to a low-cost service, you need to do that fairly significantly, and you might need to have some communication with your customers if it's the sort of business where you've got that knowledge of who your customers are. Just as an example, when businesses were able to charge credit card fees where people paid via credit card, you know, some people really ummed and ahed about doing that because they didn't want to lose their customers. But as long as you inform your customers up front to say, look, we're happy for you to pay by credit card, just want to let you know that there's a small fee for you to do that, but these are some other ways that you can pay, then you're still providing that things of importance to the customer. So whatever that service or product is you're providing, that's obviously the value proposition, but then part of it is in how you pay as well. So if you're prepared to incur the 1% or 2% fee, you'll pay via credit card. Otherwise, yep, we can pay in cash, or you can do it straight away. So I think it's just about sometimes being having really good communication with your customer about how they can do business with you. And I don't know of any of the businesses that I've had anything to do with, or of which I'm a customer, where I've gone, yeah, I really don't want to take your service because I've had to pay a particular credit card fee. You know, I'm one of those, I've bought low-cost airline and I've bought expensive cost airline, and I've still paid the credit card fee because the solution they're providing me is important enough for me to care. And now they've brought in direct debit and a few other things. So they've listened to their customer and provided those options.
Excellent. Winnie would like to ask, how do I go about making a business model that is unique and difficult to duplicate?
It's how you put all of the pieces together. So one is have a look at what's the key thing that you are doing for your customer. So there might be some differentiation in that. Then it's around those other aspects of the model, how you really build your mosaic. If you think about, if you smashed a whole lot of tiles and you put together a mosaic, it would be very difficult for someone who smashed the tiles and put it together as well, even if you're side by side. So while there's not a simple answer to this, it is a process whereby how you put your mosaic together for your business, if that's an effective way for you to be capturing value, and as long as you keep an eye on what your competitors are doing as well, then that's the opportunity to create that. And sometimes it might be, you know, a tad of trial and error, but in actually answering those questions and taking the time to do that, that will actually really help you establish whether you're looking at developing a business model that's not readily duplicated.
Awesome. Just on touching on that business model concept, Belinda would like to ask why the items of the business model are arranged in non-numerical order. Is there a reason for that?
No, it's just the way so the business model canvas is, it is a thing. I certainly didn't create it. I would have had a unique business model myself if I had, but it is a very popular tool, and it's a very simple tool, and it's really then I've overlaid the questions to that, but those are the key questions. You can really answer them in any order that sees fit. One of the exercises that we've done with groups is we've actually photocopied that template on a huge, you know, as big as you can possibly make it, And then we've used sticky notes. So if you and whoever's involved in your business or trusted people who you're helping getting it going or looking to improve, pretty much we've written all these things down on sticky notes and then just pasted them up on it. So if you've got an aspect that if you want to answer question 8 before you answer question 1, there's not a problem with that. And you can, you might answer question 8 and then you might go back and another aspect of the model, and so you might go back to question 8. There's nothing to say you have to answer questions 1 through to 9 in that particular order. You can answer the questions in any way that it sees fit, really around some brainstorming about what you already know, what problem you're trying to solve out there in the marketplace. So if you really focus on what is it that I am trying to solve for the customer, how am I doing that, and then what are all the things that stem from it. So some of the issues around that is people often have the great idea, but actually it's the execution of all the great ideas that have posed a problem. And if we think about the great energy that's going into startup these days, which is really great to have that level of creativity, but those who are actually successful really do have to go through that nitty-gritty process of understanding how they can monetize that particular idea. So use the business model however it suits you, answer the questions in whatever order you want, and continually revisit them until you settle on what you believe, and you may have to do some tweaking along the way.
Yeah, completely understand that, Maree. We are running low on time, ladies and gentlemen, so I'll just have to answer one last question from Jeff, who asks, are there any, there's numerous amounts of business models available to small business. Are there any business models that are exclusive in terms of industry or profession?
Look, I'm not specifically aware of that, and look, there could be. My thought is I need to work with things that make sense for me, so please don't hesitate to explore. By all means, if you're part of a field that has an industry association, see if they've got something that they can assist you with. And you know, you may be able to get some advice by being a member of that particular organisation, or they may be happy to provide certain free advice and assistance anyway. And you know, don't hesitate to ask, don't hesitate to go and visit businesses, and people are very willing to provide assistance when they know it's around genuine, you know, trying to get things off the ground. So I would suggest starting at an industry association or an industry body if you want to see if there's anything particular. One of the great things they can provide often is a set of benchmarks about where your business needs to be operating around things like, so if I use hospitality, for example, and staff turnover, we know that in hospitality, for the most part, staff turnover is usually higher than in other businesses, other industries, sorry. So if you're on track with your industry benchmark there, but what you'd be aiming to do when you're getting more operational is that you would want a lower turnover. And one is it makes good business sense because you train someone up to do things the way you want, and that investment in training actually becomes part of how you capture value for just a really quick example there on something that's really simple. You know, there's a zillion coffee shops out there, and they all do different things and offer different things, and some is around the brand of coffee. Near our university here in Mackay, we have this small coffee shop, and you know, I quite like their coffee, so that's a plus, but the second is it's really convenient because it's close by. And the other thing is that they actually write these little sayings on their cups, and it's become such a thing about what will I get today, what will I get today. So you know, that's just been a really simple way of differentiating a cup of coffee on something other than the coffee itself. And obviously you'd have to look more at that in terms of putting that through a whole business model, but they try and do little things that are different yet still make a good cup of coffee.
Excellent. Okay, thank you everyone for attending the webinar today. I really appreciate you tuning in. Maree, thank you so much for your time and dedicating it to giving us some really good insight. This webinar is being recorded and we uploaded to the Impact Innovation Group YouTube page, should you wish to view it again. You will receive an email with information about the Queensland Small Business Week with a short survey, and that will help us tailor these webinars to meet your interests and needs. So thank you once again for everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Maree, for your time, and have a great day.
All the best with your business ventures. Thank you.